How's it going so far? All right. Okay. Front-end development 2019. And I will see how this buddy works here, like this maybe. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Stefan. I'm a front-end developer from Berlin. I'm doing development for quite a while already. And I work for this company called Twilio. So Twilio is basically an API for all things communication. So if you want to do phone calls, SMS, WhatsApp, video, and all these kind of things, you can check that out. And I have one big love in my life, which is front-end technologies. And I do front-end really for a long, long time now. And when I started front-end was basically like this. I had not only one job interview where the perception of front-end development was that it's pixel pushing, right? It was just like, hey, Stefan, make things pretty. That's what you do, right? This changed in the meantime, though. So now, front-end development is actually serious engineering. And I think that's very cool, but what is annoying about front-end is that it's basically engineering with new practices and tools every day, right? We have the yet another framework problem, because JavaScript developers have too much time, and they reinvent the wheel every week. And this is basically my inbox yesterday. And you see when these emails came in, this is what I read over my weekend, multiplied by 5. Just to understand what is going on in the front-end universe. And it's tough, but this is how it is with the love in your life. So let's talk about what's in your stack 2019, 2020, 2021, and the following 50 minutes are, let me give you a warning, are highly opinionated. And I'm not covering religious questions. Angular, Vue, React, Svelte. Anyone heard of Svelte? That's pretty cool stuff. Not covering that. NPM Yarn, we all know that NPM will win the race at some point, but choose your thing and roll with it. At the end, it really doesn't matter. What also doesn't matter is coding styles. This is a pull request that I did years ago in a project that I was maintaining, and I was this annoying person. Can we fix the coding style here? And luckily, we figured this out these days, because we have a tool that is called prettier. So when you use prettier, for example, in your editor, it will automatically all the time fix your coding styles. And I'm a semicolon person, right? But I'm not typing semicolons anymore, because why should I? And I can write everything in one line and just hit save, and it will look for everybody the same way, which is really cool and helps collaboration across development teams. The thing with prettier, though, is that nobody loves what prettier does to her or his syntax, but it's great when it's formatting someone else's syntax. And James Long is basically the maintainer of prettier, which is a heavy or a very important part of the JavaScript ecosystem. And he once said that I've never used Typescript, I've never used Parcel, I never used Elm, never done Serverless, never used Vue. And he doesn't feel behind, which is very hard to not feel that. But at the end, you have to choose your stack, and you have to roll with it, and you have to ship it. When you choose your tools, though, you have to ask yourself one important question. Why should you bring in a tool? And that's not an easy question to answer. A good tool at the end should solve a problem, it should keep you productive, and it should make you happy, which is one of the things that is really important for me. And 3-4 years ago, when Redux appeared in the JavaScript ecosystem, Redux is a tool for state management, everybody used Redux in their stacks, right? I'm guilty of that too. One component, bring in Redux, just because I want to be a hipster JavaScript developer. The thing, though, is that you might not need certain tools for certain jobs. And you have to consider what you're using. And the first thing that I want to cover is that the web by itself is a tool too. And this year is a very interesting year. because we had a big ecosystem change. Have everybody seen that? Edge switching to Chromium. What is going on? I mean, Microsoft invested, I don't know how much money to build Edge HTML, and then they say, nope, not worth it. Chromium is just too good. Now I can have Edge on my Mac with Chrome DevTools. I tried that yesterday, was like, this is super interesting. But it also shifts the ecosystem in the JavaScript or in the front-end world, because now we have Chromium that is powering Edge, Chrome and Opera, and Samsung Internet, and all the others that use Chromium. We have WebKit that powers Safari, with Gecko that powers Firefox. So this is, instead of 4 engines, it's now 3. We've been in the browser monoculture before, right? What is cool though is when you look now, I can now use for browser support of certain features, that there was a lot of red boxes for Edge. Now we have this. Well, heavily productive developers, right? Version 18 to 75 in 1 week. Done. And we got a lot of more cross-browser supported features, which I think is great. But let's see where this now goes, that the big players all share one code base, because now we have the big players all at one table, and they have to discuss where the web will move to. So let's talk about the good stuff. CSS Grid, made it. That is good stuff. So this is a video of my private website, and you see on the right-hand side there's this one container, a very long container that breaks out of the whole grid. Let me play that again. So we have it there. This is not easy to do with CSS. You can do it with floats and with a lot of divs and stuff. That is hard work. But with CSS Grid, you can say display grid, then you can define grid template columns. You have a repeat statement. You can say out of fit, and then you can say it should be at least 20 M and maximum 1 fraction. So this means that, whoop, 2 lines of CSS, and we have a responsive grid. I think that is already very exciting. And now you can bring in another statement to span certain elements over several rows. This is just one more line of CSS to make that work. This makes me very, very excited. So also support for grid today, we're there. So we can use that today. And maybe you don't need grid.css in your bundle anymore. If you want to learn more about CSS Grid, Wes Bos maintains this video series. Highly recommend it. And I'm a web performance person. I want to get stuff down as quickly as possible. And fonts are a horrible thing in the internet. And there's also this property that is called font display. With font display, basically, you can define how fonts should be loaded. And there are 2 things. Did that run? There are 2 different approaches. So there's void, flash of invisible text, and there's faut, flash of unstyled text. And they bring completely different user experiences, right? What do you prefer? Do you prefer text that you can read, which jumps a little bit? You can minimize the jumping, or do you prefer to look at a blank screen? So when you implement fonts, you have to be careful in how you implement these. So now we have font display, which has a few properties. We have font display auto, which basically does nothing, right? Then we have font display swap, which shows always the fallback font first and then switches this with when the custom font is in. And we have font display block. This is evil. You don't want to use that because then nothing is shown until the font is in there. And maybe your font takes 10 seconds to load. This is why people don't read your article. Because, well, there's nothing to read. And then we have font display fallback, which basically gives the browser its own metrics to switch to fonts, but it's still better than auto. What's the support here? We're also there. When you do fonts, you might want to check that out. And Google I/O was 2 weeks ago, or last week. When was last week? Google Fonts now also come with font display swap as default. So when you use Google Fonts, you maybe want to adjust the CSS file that you're loading. If you want to learn more about fonts and how you should load them, Zach Lead has a comprehensive guide on how you can load fonts, and I highly recommend to check that out. Then there's also a very unspectacular pseudo selector in CSS. Focus within. So when I saw this for the first time, I couldn't be less excited. So basically what this allows you is to specify that you want to style an element when something inside of this element is focusable. So what you see there is that I'm tabbing through this formula, and I'm giving a gray background to the parent element. So that's not exciting, is it? But with this, we can finally do CSS-only drop-down menus in an accessible way. This is now keyboard accessible. This wasn't possible before without JavaScript to make a good drop-down menu. So with this, you can do this, which makes me again very excited because now I can ship less JavaScript. If you want to read more, this is an article covering that. Support, also there. We're living in a good world. And then we have a lot of fancy things coming to the JavaScript ecosystem that are all a lot of different observers. So let me show you a little bit of code. So what we have here is an options object, and I'm defining a threshold. Then I'm defining something that is called intersection observer. This will be called with several entries. And these entries have an intersecting property. And then I'm switching a data property on this element that is included in this entry. And then I grab all elements that have a class lazy load, and I'm initializing, or I'm connecting the intersection observer. So what is that? That is lazy loading. Without scroll handlers, without blogging UI thread, all this cool stuff with just a few lines of code. I think that's super nice. So what other observers do we have? Well, there are a few of them. So we have an intersection observer that can give us information when something enters or leaves the viewport. We have the mutation observer that tells us when DOM nodes are altered and removed or added. We have the performance observer that pushes performance metrics to us when we want to access them. We have the resource observer that tells us when things change their dimensions. And we have the reporting observer. You may have noticed in browsers there are these little logs in the console sometimes that you're violating certain rules in Chrome or in Firefox. You can access these with the reporting observer and can ping them back to your monitoring service. Maybe you want to know when you're using deprecated APIs. For example, what I do with my own website is that I'm using the performance observer and I'm logging JavaScript tasks that are taking longer than 50 milliseconds to the console, just so that I get a hint on how my JavaScript is performing. What you see there is that I'm registering a performance observer for the long task, and this gives me information, hey, here's JavaScript blocking for 50 milliseconds. You could ping that back to your monitoring service and can get maybe a little bit better information. But I showed you how you can do lazy loading with the intersection observer. Speaking of lazy loading, this will come. Native lazy loading for images and iframes. It will look like this. That will be super cool. But now we're entering cutting edge. The loading support is not there yet, but do you see already? Due to the Chromium sharing, Edge has it behind a flag now too. And browsers evolve quickly. This is sooner there than you can think of. The future for images is bright though. There's more stuff. So usually when you load an image, you don't have layout information about the image, which then means that pages are jumping when the image data comes in. What you usually do is you apply a padding hack with a certain aspect ratio. Intrinsic size will come at some point. This is, for example, what Google AMP does. You are forced to give information about the layout of the images. And with this, you can avoid jumping pages because you can tell the browser what the aspect ratio of the image will be. And at some point, we will also be able to define how important something should be. When you have 4 images in a carousel with HD resolution, maybe the 3 images that are not visible yet don't need to be loaded with the highest priority. This is where we can prioritize resources that come in. And images will get superpowers. I predict end of the year, but don't quote me on that. And speaking of images, we also have now finally a winning image format. Since end of last year, Firefox joined the party supporting webp. So here we see a JPEG, which has the height of 400K. In WebP, it's roughly a third. And WebP by itself is a pretty good image format. It supports transparency additionally, and you can even do animations. And if you want to use that today in your front-end code, you can use the picture element with something like this. This goes from top to bottom, and the browser picks what it understands and will load the request that is suitable. This way you can save a little bit of bytes on the wire, which is very, very nice. So I already mentioned that Firefox joined the party mid-end last year. Peer pressure for WebKit is pretty high here now. So I assume that this will come at some point during this week. And I'm keeping track of browser technologies. You saw my inbox, right? I'm doing this every weekend. And what I noticed and what I know is that evergreen browsers that we have today evolve very quickly. In a year, just because something is not supported today, doesn't mean that it's not supported next year. Stuff comes quickly. So let's talk about JavaScript, shall we? We have finally ECMAScript modules. JavaScript was this thing that didn't have a module system for some reason. We put everything in the window object because that's what you do when you're developing, right? Put everything in the global scope. That's a good idea. So the way this works is that you can ship your HTML today, and you see there that there's one script with type module, and there's a legacy script with no module. This way you can ship two different bundles depending on what your browser understands. Type module has a few core characteristics. So let's have a look at these. ECMAScript modules are strict mode by default, so you can drop all these use stricts on your files, which is nice. Top level is not window, it's undefined, which means that you cannot leak stuff accidentally. Variables are local to the script. Another thing against globals. And you can import other modules, which makes then a request, and it is a module system, which is really cool. Additionally, they're always loaded async, and they're only executed after the HTML is done parsing. So theoretically, you could drop every DOM ready, because in a module, everything is done. That was not true. let me revert that. So, but it's finished after the HTML is parsing. So what's the support? We are also there, which is pretty cool. 2 years ago, because I like these kind of things, I wrote about that. So if you want to read if you should now stop bundling and only use modules and make 100 requests per HTML page, you can have a read there. The cool thing, though, is that the ecosystem immediately jumped onto this. So what you see there is Evan View, and he brought it into Vue CLI to ship two different bundles. So what do current front-end applications ship today? So here we see a typical HTML file with code splitting to ship different bundles for several needs so that the caching is better. And there you see a no module thing. That's the legacy bundle. And then we see a different bundle that is a module bundle. And it turns out when a browser supports ECMAScript modules, it also supports stuff like let, it supports arrow functions, it even supports async await. This means that when your browser understands this, you can drop a lot of transpilation using Babel and you can ship less JavaScript, which is very exciting because at the end, shipping less is always great. The future is there. And the future is also coming to Node.js. So we're not there yet, but at a certain point in time, ECMAScript modules will be inside of Node. And that is really cool because then we can share more code between the server and the browsers. So let's change topics a little bit. Let's talk about types. TypeScript, right? And I'm a JavaScripter for 8 years now. And I was always, should I do something? Is that really annoying? Okay. And I was always one of these, who needs that? I'm JavaScript, right? I just freestyle everything down the command line, in my editor. I don't need autocompletion because I'm smart and I can remember stuff. Last year, I did a pull request in our ecosystem. I was working for a different company at the time. And I thought that I made a tiny change, which resulted in 21 changed files in this ecosystem. Let me show you what I did. So there was this function, which is Typescript. And basically what this translates into human is the async function migration accepts the argument migration creator of the type function and returns a promise that resolves with a collection of type intent. Okay, so I'm not used to types, right? I write JavaScript, so that's already tricky. So I changed that, and I added this, changed the signature. Not a big deal, right? Everything broke. Of course everything broke. Because TypeScript is smart enough to tell me, hey, Stefan, this is not how you can do it. You have now to fix the test, you have to fix all the dependencies. This is normal business for someone dealing with types his whole life. For a JavaScripter, this is magic. And you see also the whole JavaScript ecosystem switching to TypeScript. So for example, webp switched to TypeScript at a certain point in time. And guess what? Just because they added TypeScript, they found several bugs that they didn't know before. Because the TypeScript compiler was smart enough to tell them, hey, this will crash when this happens. Yeah, and what you can do now is, yeah, well, all the packages, and when you use VS Code, and a certain package ships with types, you get fancy autocompletion, which still makes me happy every day. So especially when you're building large-scale JavaScript application, you should take all the safety and help that you can get, because otherwise it will become very hard. And I maintained big, large JavaScript application, and it's tough. Another thing that was very buzzworthy over the last years was progressive web apps, right? They have 3 core characteristics. They're reliable, fast, and engaging. Reliable means that they should work without a network connection, so they're offline capable. They're fast, so you should follow performance best practices, and they should be engaging, which means that you could theoretically do push notifications and stuff. If this is, yeah. And the core technology of progressive web apps is the holy service worker, which is basically a technology that acts as a proxy between the browser and the internet. And how's the support for the service worker? Well, we're pretty much there. So if you want to check if you can use service workers, you can go there. And how does it work? So the way it works is that you register a JavaScript file, and inside of this JavaScript file, you can add an event listener and intercept all the network requests that are going in and out. You can cache them, make them offline capable, and this way you can make your websites offline and can they make better and more resilient for future navigations. This is very tedious to do though, and when you do service worker development, it's tough. It's honestly tough. What you can do though then is you can use abstractions like Workbox, which is a library that is maintained by Google. And with this, making your website and web app offline capable is 5 lines, which is pretty sweet. And with this, you can engage maybe with your users. And when you can go 100% offline, you can do that very quickly. And these 5 lines lead to basically this, that I make a website offline capable with just a few lines. So as I already said, I think that it is important in the front end to know how these kind of things work. But I think that we also should use the abstractions that are out there to kind of build better things. Speaking about progressive web apps, progressive web apps, was it? Congratulations. What's your name? Congratulations, Priya. You also won a talk on this stage later. So, bingo, okay. So I think that it's important to know how these technologies work, but we should use what is out there. Well, that was a first that I was interrupted with a bingo. Progressive web apps. What is also happening very soon, this is currently shipping in Chrome Canary. This is the progressive web app for Twitter Lite, and you can now install them on desktop environments. And this will be a game changer. I'm the person that wraps every website with an Electron app. With this, the web truly becomes an application platform, which is very, very cool in my opinion. When you do applications, you still need an API connection though. So how do the cool kids write their APIs today? Second. So what, another bingo maybe? So what is GraphQL? So there's this fun dialogue that is basically that a backend engineer talks to a front-end engineer. And the backend engineer is saying, so you're saying this GraphQL will allow any web or native engineer to arbitrarily query basically any field and any backend service recursively, however they want, without any backend engineers involved? Well, that is what it is. That is actually pretty sweet. So let me show you how this looks like. So how did I develop single-page apps for years? I kick off requests for every resource because REST is how the internet should work, right? Mapping to HTTP verbs, this is how this was imagined at invention. This means that you need one request per resource to kick off your app. Depending on the environment of your browsers, this can be very slow and brittle. With GraphQL, this changes and it moves everything into one request and it switches to a post that feels very dirty, I know. But you can also fetch data and mutate data in the same run, which is like, okay. And the way it works is that you define a query, which allows you to really define what fields you want to have, and then you get the result matching to this query. So it's one request for everything. And the cool thing is that GraphQL comes with a schema definition, which means that there are tools out there that when you do a GraphQL app, you really go into Graphical, that is a tool to find out what data is available. And you just do tap, 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 tap until you have all the data that you want. I like pretty software, so I prefer to use GraphQL Playground, which is basically a wrapper around Graphical. And you see there that you get all the information that you need inside of this. The API is self-documented. This speeds up development tremendously. And I also work for an API provider, right? What does that mean when you're an API provider? You have two developers that build the API. Now, developers are lazy people, and they don't want to do plain HTTP when they develop, right? They want to use SDKs. So you need developers that build the SDKs. The team is growing, right? Now we have 8 developers just because you're an API provider. And now you have people, oh, we have hipster languages. Sorry, that is not, we have new languages. And now the developers probably don't want to document all these kind of things. So you need also to docs people. And now you have 10 people just because you're an API provider. With GraphQL, that changes a little bit because you don't necessarily need the SDKs anymore. And a GraphQL endpoint, when the person knows how to deal with GraphQL, it works in any language. So my life, kind of working for an API provider, becomes way easier, which is a great thing. I was very skeptical when I saw GraphQL for the first time. But the industry now is really pushing forward, and I honestly believe that GraphQL will change the way we work completely. And GraphQL will also lower barriers for all the developers. I know how to write GraphQL, and when I want to bootstrap an app, I just use a GraphQL endpoint, and I connect all the things, and I query what I want without reading documentation about an SDK. That is magic. I can go to production very quickly. Also, what came up last year, again, which was very surprising for me because it was hot 5 years ago already, were static sites. I mean, it's markup, right? What is exciting about that? So when I started development, static sites were like this. So I wrote templates and content in certain files. Then there was a static site generator like Jekyll or what else was there? Metalsmith. And that resulted in a website. Then I wanted to do cool stuff with CSS and JavaScript, so I had a different code base here. All went into a build tool that was Grunt in my choice. Anyone remembers that one? Good old times. And now I had two different code bases, maybe in Ruby and JavaScript, which led to a constant context switch, which is very annoying. But it's also very brittle because maybe you bring API data, and then you have to maintain several handlings in several code bases. And you have to also write API data to disk to make it accessible to your static site generator. And the JavaScript client side will then use the APIs directly. But writing to disk is very annoying in that case, I think. This all now changed a little bit with new static site generators that have a unified code base, fetch API data during build time, and yeah, universal JavaScript apps. JavaScript in the front, in the back, it's just one code base, which is very cool. Yeah, this is how it works. What advantages does that have? Static HTML at the end is cheap, easy to deploy, and easy to host. You can put them on S3. You can put them at new hosting services. That's really cool when you want to ship a product. A unified code base helps me not forgetting to update Ruby templates when I'm updating JavaScript. Developer tooling in the JavaScript ecosystem is very good today. I don't want to develop without hot reloading and all these things anymore. You've got the NPM ecosystem. There's always a package for something, which is always good. And you can use cutting-edge technologies. If you want to learn more about that, I wrote about that last year, because I think what happens in the static site field right now is very, very good. Tools that you could use are Next.js, Nuxt, or Gatsby. These are universal JavaScript apps that can render static. That's pretty sweet. And the most successful one today, though, is Gatsby. And this comes with a very hip stack, right? So it's React, it ships easily as progressive web apps, and it has a GraphQL data layer. When I saw that for the first time, is Dev Day built in Gatsby? Okay. So when I saw Gatsby for the first time, I thought that it is heavily over-engineered. Oh my God. But Gatsby has this idea that they bring in GraphQL as a data connector, which then means that you can write GraphQL, and Gatsby during build time will fetch all the data and will provide JavaScript files that you can deploy to a static hoster. They are calling this a content mesh. This means that you can build and deploy a static website and really have data sources like Google Drive, I don't know, JSON files, Markdown, whatever API is out there, and at the end, the result is static. When you develop it though, it feels good like you would directly talk to APIs. At the end, the ecosystem now is moving to this statement that basically every web app is a website and every website is a web app, which is kind of cool, I think. Speaking about web apps, we ended up in a horrible space last year or 2 years ago because everything just got out of hand. It just got too complicated. And the main reason for that were bundlers. And the tool that wins the race today is Webpack. Webpack 2 years ago got so complicated though that people started making jokes about Webpack. People call themselves Senior Webpack Config Manager, or the second one is better, Executive Webpack Configuration Engineer. I think that's a great title for a job interview. Tweets like this, for example, were everywhere. Because Webpack was very, very hard to develop and configure. What happened then is that Parcel appeared. And this is when I noticed that the zero config movement started. And I decided to show you Parcel. It's not that cutting edge anymore, but I think it's still great. So let's do an experiment here. Bum, bum, bum. All right. Font size okay? Bigger? Okay, so what we have here is basically a kickoff bootstrap project. I use Parcel for prototyping because I think it's really cool. All I have is an index file, an index HTML file that requests an index JavaScript file. So let's start filling this with life. So what I can do here is import main from main.js. Here we go. let's execute this. Then let's go to main. Oops. Export default function. Let's do some DOM manipulations here, for example, like const lm document create element div. Let's give this a class, element class list, add foo. Let's give it some inner text. Hello dev day. And let's do document body append what? Append child element. Cool. Let's bring some styles, because without styles it's not pretty. Import styles from, what is it? Main CSS. Let's go to main CSS and was text, no color, white, and background. Say someone a color? Green. There we go. So and this is basically a quick Bootstrap app with JavaScript modules and styles and all these kind of things. So what I now can hopefully do is I can just do this. Parcel will figure out what it needs to do. Hopefully. Where was the typo? Oh, good catch. So let's do that again. Yeah. So where's Here we go. So basically what had happened now, it provides all the things that I need, and for bootstrapping stuff and building an app, that is just magic. I don't have to configure anything, which I think is very cool. So Parcel was the first tool that kind of did that, at least as I noticed. So what did just happen is that I had an index.html file, it has an entry JavaScript file, and then it figured out, hey, here's some CSS hanging around. Maybe we should do something with this. Then we have more JavaScript files and more. And this works with Typescript, Sass, and it just does all these kind of things, zero config, which I think is cool. And what happens when you're the big player in the ecosystem and a new tool shows up and people start talking about it? Well, Webpack fixed some things, right? Which is great. The ecosystem is pushing forward and depending on competition. What happened then is that toolkits started to appear. And we have really good developer experience now. So what you see here is Create React App, which you can use to bootstrap React apps without configuration, which is cool. The same happened for Vue. The same happened for Preact. And the result is something that you can just use and you can start hacking and building stuff. I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, that was not the case. This was just that I had to bike shed a weekend to figure out how I set up React. So I think we're in a good place right now. And all these kind of tools then have a single dependency, which is pretty cool, because then I don't have to deal with 10 dependencies and all the major, minor, and Semver updates, because Semver by itself isn't really working, is it? So a single dependency is cool. If you want to learn more about toolkits that are out there, you can check out this GitHub repository. I think there's cool stuff in there. So speaking about tools, I think that good tools should just work, but at the end, it's very important that you can inject them and that you can configure your own stuff. When you pick your tool chain, make sure that this is the case, because tool login is a thing. And when you cannot get out of your tool at some point, that is very, very hard to do then. Let's talk about automation. And in particular, testing. I love writing end-to-end tests. Said no one ever. So and what is now around for a year or two is, want to take a picture? Here we go. Yeah. Is Cypress. And Cypress is a new tool that tries to solve the problem of end-to-end testing. And here's how it works. So basically, I'm kicking off a test runner in Cypress. This gives me a test runner. I have some test files here. And then it gives me a nice end-to-end interface, and I can inspect the page that the tests run in. And I'm checking if there is a headline and if it's visible and if it contains my name. And with this, I can develop end-to-end tests side by side. Everybody who did Selenium at a certain point in time, it's just like press fire and wait and then debug 2 hours what happened. This is super, super nice. If you want to learn more about how this works, the head of engineering at Cypress, Gleb Bamutov, jumped on a call with me and we chatted an hour about Cypress and he told me how I actually can use that. So you can check that out if you want to. And we have also very powerful utilities. And last year I was in a conversation with a friend of mine because we ship broken links on our content marketing website, right? Happens every day. And I'm the checklist person, so I told him, hey, Chris, can we add this in a manual checklist? And he was like, dude, you're a developer. This is the wrong approach. No human should check if there are broken links in your HTML. So does anyone remember Phantom.js? I think Phantom.js was great. I even did an online course about that. Unfortunately, it's not maintained anymore. But today we have Puppeteer, which is basically a way to manipulate Chrome browsers. And I think that's very cool. So for this problem of broken links, what I do is that I define a URL and I bring in, write a JavaScript snippet. I bring in Puppeteer, I launch it, I open a new page, and then I wait until the page is loaded. Then I call page evaluate. This is when the script changes context from node into the actual website that is running in. So this code is executed in the website that is opened. So I grab all the links and I'm grabbing all the URLs. Then I'm going on and I map over all the URLs and I make requests to these URLs to see what status code comes back. And then I filter all the invalid URLs and I can log the whole thing. And the result of this is a quick and easy to use script that is part of the ecosystem of my last company now. Because we just run this and it will tell us when there are broken links everywhere. If you want to learn more on how to automate Chromium browsers, you can check out Puppeteer examples. I think that's a good thing. And you can do cool stuff. Like you can do analysis for your assets that you ship. You can create sitemaps or following all the links. You could now potentially say, well, Stefan, I can do that with curl, which is not true when you have client-side rendering in place, right? This executes JavaScript, which is very nice. You can check if your service worker is running properly. And maybe you want to check on how fast you're dealing against your competition. So you can also automate things, make screenshots, and all these kind of cool things. So what I want to tell you is that you should automate everything and spend your time with fun stuff. I have to speed up a little bit. I'm a little slow today. So let's talk about the big buzzword. Any bingo? No. So serverless basically means that you can take your front-end skills and can do what basically only a front-end developer, a back-end developer can do. I think that's pretty accurate as a front-end developer. I do think, though, that it's a little bit different and that this is more accurate. Serverless means that I'm a JavaScript dev and everything is Legos. That is almost accurate because I don't think it's about JavaScript, like at all. So the world that we live in today is like this, that developers just can play with Lego. We have the big players like Google Cloud, AWS, or Azure, which are too complicated for me because, well, AWS is very hard. But then we have new providers like Netlify, Zeit, Contentful for content, Algolia for search, Auth0 for authentication, or Twilio for communication stuff. There's always a service for that. I, as a front-end developer, just have to put all the pieces together and connect all the services. You can deploy sites very, very easily today. So to deploy a website a few years ago, what you had to do is you had to maybe use something like GitHub Pages, and you connect it with a CI system like Travis, and then you push some code somewhere. These days we have Netlify, which I think is an excellent service because this is a service that is built for static site hosting, and it comes with a CI pipeline included. To deploy a website on Netlify, you define a script, a folder, and you're done. And it does that automatically. And of course, when you talk about serverless, what you have to talk about is function as a service, right? Because this is what people argue about what serverless actually means, and a lot of people say it's function as a service. This is the idea that you can upload and deploy functions into the cloud, and you don't have to maintain any servers. They automatically upscale when you have a Hacker News hit, and that you're not paying them when they're not running. So there's this little helper here if you want to check out how much you would pay for a serverless function. So the way this basically works is that you define a function. This is a Lambda function in this case. For AWS, you define API gateway, which is a horrible, complicated name for a front-end person. This scared me a lot. And then you go to AWS in theory, and this is how AWS looks like, right? Congratulations, dealing with this one. And eventually, maybe you find a function editor and the API gateway. This is horribly tedious. This is why when I have to deal with these kind of things, it's the serverless framework, which works for Google Cloud, AWS, Microsoft, and IBM. There's also Cloud.js, which only works for AWS. And with this, you can deploy functions running in the cloud very quickly. So you need one configuration file, like this, these two files that I already showed you, and the result is this, that with 3 files, I can deploy functions to AWS that then will automatically scale. And yeah, I'm skipping that result because I'm running short here. And since I discovered that I, as a front-end developer, can deploy HTTP endpoints, I spent serverless weekends. So what you see here is one function that accepts some path parameters. I'm going with an async function, so I'm going to try catch here. Then I'm getting a short URL outside of the path parameters. I'm using Contentful here, which is a JSON service to get data back. And then I'm just parsing what came in, and I'm returning a response with 301 and a new location. And the result of this is what every developer probably built in their career is a URL shortener. And I leave that sync for 5 seconds because I'm the troll of the internet, at least this is how I feel. I bought my links online, which I think is still ridiculous. I'm also building bots now because you can schedule functions, which is pretty cool. And when you're dealing with big AWS stacks, there's nothing to worry about because your admins won't give you enough access anyways to create big costs. But maybe you don't have to go with the big players because there are function providers everywhere. All these big new serverless APIs all have functions, or a lot of them have functions included, which is nice. And with this, you can then connect all these little pieces and build powerful applications in almost no time. My friend Phil once said that webhooks are the API of the web. So when you have 2 different services, and what I wanted to do is that I wanted to push data from Discourse, which is a forum, into Slack. And well, I needed a quick backend to pipe data through. I can deploy myself a function very quickly and distribute the data to all the channels that I need. And to do this, it's really only a few lines of JavaScript, deploy it and forget and connect your ecosystem. And the result of that was a nice little Slack bot to push data from A to B, which I don't have to maintain anymore. And I don't have to nag a sysadmin person to tell someone, hey, can I deploy something here? I just push functions everywhere. The cool thing though is, remember my link checker, I have Chrome running in the cloud too, to automate that away, which then resulted in this response to kind of get when I have 4 fours. I'm following the mantra, just write a Lambda function for it every day. And then I combine everything with static sites. So what you see here is a website that I built last week, and this sends SMS messages. It's static HTML, 1 Lambda function, and that's it. I feel like I have the power of the universe today because all these services give me power for free, and I can just connect all these kind of things. If you're interested in learning more, Chris Koya gives this, and looking for more tools, Chris Koya gave this excellent talk about serverless technologies. So spend your time building a business and connect all the dots. I think that's very important. And have fun, because you can now be very productive. If you want to learn more, Chris Koya also maintains the power of serverless for front-end developers. And this site is built in something that is called CodePen Projects. So basically what he does is he develops his whole website in the cloud with his own service, which is kind of recursion meta. But there are also new online code editors out there. So for example, there's Code Sandbox, and that is super cool. So this is able to install dependencies. It feels snappy, it feels good, and if you are a VS Code user, this looks familiar, right? They run VS Code in the cloud. It's the same code base. What? And then we have also new awareness coming up, especially in the front-end ecosystem, and that makes me very, very happy because I'm a performance person and I want to ship good products. So we have services out there like Web Page Test, which is not a pretty website, but it's very useful when you do performance optimizations. And we have got Lighthouse, which comes with Google Chrome. And I think these 2 tools are excellent tools. But I think there's one more tool that doesn't get enough love in the public sphere today, which is WebHint. WebHint is developed by Microsoft, and this is the most picky tool ever. I'm working for months to get away all the notifications, all the tiny nitpicks that webp gives me. So I'm really much into building good things, and today we're not doing such a good job. I'm also into the accessibility field, so let's just start caring about building better products and not care about the latest and greatest framework that is out there. My wish for the future, that's the last point. I hope that we figure this one out. Web components are there since I'm developing stuff, but it's never really made it. So the idea is that you have custom elements, that you can define these, and these are then components that are natively supported. The support is not that bad. And instead of having a date picker in 3 frameworks, I would love to have a date picker that is wrapped by 3 frameworks. Maybe we will come there eventually. For example, companies like GitHub ship web components also in production. So what you see here is that the time ago component is a web component. You can use that with progressive enhancement. So let's bet on our platform. So I showed you a lot of tools and things. So how do you stay up to date? So as you already saw in my inbox, I'm a newsletter person. So if you want to learn about my my favorite newsletters, you can go there. I think there's some good stuff in there. The best resource out there is definitely Web Platform News. Zim Vidas, he's a creation guy. He posts content almost daily on what evolves in the web. It's not that tool specific, but rather what is now supported, how can you build things. This is a fantastic resource. And when you want to watch out for browser support and these kind of things, there are 2 repositories that I highly recommend to start watching. It's the Can I Use repository, because when a new feature makes it into browsers, you will get a notification via email or however you use GitHub. And there's also the browser compat repository, which powers MDN and all the support tables in MDN. So when you want to follow these 2 repositories, you will get information what lands in browsers. And I'm also using Chrome Status, which is a progressive web app that pushes new stuff to my phone whenever something happens. And you see there that at some point the layout jank API is coming. I don't know what that is, but we will find out. So to close the whole thing, front-end development is evolving very, very quickly. And I think it's very, very exhausting. But you have to accept that you cannot know everything, you cannot try everything, and we all, or I, have to stop worrying about falling behind. Because what James said is very, very true. Just use your tools wisely, ship with them, and then be happy and be productive. Because you cannot always be cutting edge. That's just not possible. Use what works for you. And that's all I have to say.
It's working? Yes, it's working. I know, there are a million questions, but you might have noticed that the food just went out, so please make it very short. Behind you, the guy.
Just a super quick addition, something that I'm pretty excited about is that also web assembler is all supported in all major browsers, so you're not only relying on JavaScript anymore now.
Yep. I'm watching WebAssembly not that closely, but I don't see it really entering the industry very soon, but let's see. Yeah.
Hey, just want to thank you for the talk, also because it's directly in front of the lunch, so we have a lot of stuff to discuss with our colleagues here around, because very opinionated, and I like that. Thanks.
The third one? No one. Very good. So, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing talk. It was really long and it was really full of lots of information, and we tweeted about you and you have lots of new followers now. This is so great.
I will be around there and yeah, we'll hang out the whole day. Thank you.
He will be around there.
At the Twilio booth, there are still some stickers and t-shirts.
Yeah, lots of them, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.